My name is TC Tolbert, and I'm on the chopping block at visceralchange.org.
Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of the Chopping Block. I am super excited. I'm here with colleague TC Tolbert. TC, how are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited, yeah. And so you are an author and a poet laureate, and I that's incredible. And I can't wait to dig into some of these titles and the journey and more about you. So let's jump right into it.
Okay.
I mentioned author, mentioned poet laureate, but you identify as many things, right? And you identify as a trans, genderqueer, feminist, collaborator, mover, and poet, right? But above all that, you identify as, and I quote, a human in love with humans doing human things. Unveil that for us. What does that mean?
You know, it really does mean that. But when I first wrote it, I was thinking a lot, not even about the positive things that humans do,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's actually really easy to fall in love with.
Yes.
But really the awkward, painful, stumbling things that humans do.
Yes.
I genuinely feel a tenderness toward that, and what I think is love. It's a sort of an expansiveness within me opens up when I see when I see folks struggling with what does it mean to be human.
Yes. Yes.
and often that looks like failure trying to get to success, or moving through challenges.
Sure.
And so I just genuinely love that. I love the range of human attempt. Say that.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I often used to ask this question to staff members I had, sort of like, as like an icebreaker to get to know you. I would ask a ton of random questions that were philosophical questions, if you will. One question I would ask is, how much of our humanity do we lose in being humane? And what I was trying to get at was like the negotiation between what's primitive and what is sort of nurtured over time and socialized. What do you think about that discussion? Is there a discussion to be had when we talk about the humanity of ourselves? Do we find ourselves letting go too much of what is, or is what makes us uniquely human the fact that we can actually challenge what is?
That is
different question for different time, maybe.
No, it's still great. I mean, in some ways, I'm really, really deeply in that particular struggle internally right now. I've been cultivating a contemplative practice.
Sure.
And yeah, what my desire is, what my body wants. And how that is sometimes, maybe oftentimes, in conflict with what my brain or my manners or any
Sure.
number of things tell me I should do.
Sure.
Is very present for me right now.
Sure.
And I don't know. I don't know which side of that coin, I guess, sort of makes us more human.
Sure. Yeah.
but I love sort of turning it over, you know, and maybe
Right.
that's it. Like, you know, just constantly sort of turning it around. And maybe making that particular question or questions of our humanity not into answers. Like I said, I'm sure your question is on some level more rhetorical, right? Like
Sure. Sure.
But that the question itself becomes a kind of tool, you
It
know,
does.
to like get things moving
That's
and
right.
yeah.
That's right. You know, when we think about, at least I think about, you know, we talk about the cart coming before the horse or the chicken before the egg. Good, you know, good and evil. What are we inherently? You know, and how much work, you think about how much work it takes to be good
Mm-hmm.
versus how much work it takes to be evil. It changes the way that question looks sometimes, you know. And so when you started talking about falling in love with humans doing human things, you know, that really sort of reinvigorated this question I had pondered a couple years ago. And so I had to take a second to explore that with you. So thank you for following me on that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I hear that bio read a fair amount, and
Mm-hmm.
I often want to sort of interject and say, that also means the bad stuff, you know, like, and
Yes.
not to glorify it and not to say like we should move to sort of celebrate it, but to let it sort of open up something within us where we can sort of be like more capacious or
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. You know, one thing that really grabbed me about your website was your unique approach to pronouns, right? I hadn't explored pronouns or seen pronouns approached in this particular way, where you say when addressing you, it's he, him in conversation, and then it's sort of s/he, sort of that old traditional she, he, s/he when it's in writing. Why that distinction? And if you can, tell us why pronouns are important overall in general.
Yeah, that's a great question. Something I really struggle with still. I well, as a, you know, as a poet, as a writer, I just love language.
Yes.
I love the way that it is. Uh, it's everything at once. You know, so simple, so complex, all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and I also love the way that things look on the page. Not just how they sound, although I love how they sound too, and the sort of space between that.
Right.
So I wanted, and it feels accurate that when someone is with me, you know, when we're in each other's presence,
Right.
the language there is different. I feel like that's true for all of us.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yes.
I talk to people in very different ways than I write to them.
That's right. Well said. Yeah.
And so I wanted to draw that out a little bit. And also now that I pass, you know, as I think a lot of people actually read me as a cis gay man. Yeah, it's like, which I'll be honest, I prefer that.
Okay.
I mean, I prefer folks to read me as a white cis gay man than as a white cis straight man.
Okay. I follow you.
But I'd rather they read me as a white trans man.
Sure. I got you.
Anyway, so the writing element allows me to draw that out a little bit, in a way that like my gesture can't, because I'm not in person, my gesture can draw out some of that queerness, but it can't on the page, so I sort of use that s/he to do that.
I love that the way you are, like, your use of your distinction between the platforms of language, right, and how you're able to utilize them in unique ways, which I think offers something for the academy, for the world, for lifelong learners to consider about language. It is unique, and I think it's meant to be explored in this way. And so it's fantastic. Honestly.
I mean, I grew up in Tennessee in a Pentecostal church.
Okay.
And so, you know, they were speaking in tongues and, you know, this, what we might call irregular uses of language.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
And that has shaped me, you know, to really drive sort of right into all of the levels that language can operate on and how those are really distinct.
That's right.
And sort of have different ways of arriving in the body.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the United States is excuse me, is a place to do that. We think about all the different dialects that you'll find here. And so gender pronouns, in general, TC, how important are they in general, in terms of maybe validation, affirmation, and, you know, do you run the risk of actually outing somebody by engaging in pronouns from the very beginning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you mean like in terms of like a teaching situation where I might sort of do a pronoun activity?
That's right. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I've really grown in that, in various practices of how to approach that in the classroom. Again, especially as my particular embodiment has shifted more towards what might be read as, you know, very hegemonic, right?
Sure.
And so I think there is a risk of putting someone on the spot or sort of asking them to out themselves in some way. And there's also the risk of folks in the room who know what you're asking, but they want to be, well, they're uncomfortable with it. And so they want to be either caustic or, you know, that there's the sort of dismissiveness of it or even harmful joking, you know?
Sure.
So it opens up a platform for everybody in some uncomfortable ways.
Yes.
I've moved into doing an activity where I give that as sort of like a menu of things you could share about yourself.
Okay.
So that, you know, if you want to share that, that's a thing, and I share my pronouns. So I try to normalize it as a practice, but it's not required. I guess I certainly can't speak for all trans professors or teachers, but I think that's true for, you know, trans folks facilitating as well, right? Mm-hmm. That there's a real tension in that. Even if you have the sort of safest space, right? Where it seems and feels like anyone could come out, that doesn't mean that person has even been able to come out to themselves.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. That was years long process for me. So
sure.
I'm really thankful people didn't ask me, you know, at various times. And, you know, I know for myself early on when I started my gender transition, where I was talking to people about it, I thought, well, I have to get top surgery. Like that's what it means to be trans. That's what it means to be transmasculine. And so I was just, moving as quickly as possible to that goal. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't really until I met another transmasculine person who had like a pink wallet and, you know, kind of did all of these things that disrupted masculinity as he was also embracing masculinity, you know?
Right.
And I was like, oh, right. I remember he said to me, it's still your body. Like there are trans narratives and you get to decide which of those fit.
Right.
And that was, you know, that was 2004 and it was shocking.
Yeah.
Just truly shocking.
Yeah. And it speaks to the pervasiveness of what we perceive to be normal, right? Mm-hmm. and standard. And so there's a lot of discussion, and I'm not quite sure if this fits for where you were going, but of sort of intra-group dialogue and conflict about, and, you know, internalizing some of the some of the normalized states of being, that we lose sight of concepts, like simple concepts like it's still your body, or we're still all the same race in this way, and we lose sight of that. So powerful moment in '04, I can only imagine.
Oh, so
All
thankful for that person.
right. I want to stick with language for a little bit, and let's talk about sort of the trans space project. Very interested in this. You talk about how language is so important. You even have a little note on your website about, some notes about language and decisions to use certain things. And one thing that I saw right away was the asterisk after the trans, to be all inclusive, really all encompassing as best as possible. As an educator who's always growing myself and the other diversity and inclusion folks out there who are in the same space, this is an ever evolving area of the work, right? Language, as we move on. Tell us about the Trans Space project, and tell us about the importance of language as well, and why this is something we need to continue to evolve in.
Yeah, thank you. So the Trans Space project is, well, it's truly started as an idea, in 2005-ish, 2004, 2005, where I was really just thinking about how to fill up spaces that felt very exclusive and dangerous for trans folks, in particular bathrooms.
Yes.
How to fill that space with our presence. And I thought really the safest way to do that would be with our voices.
Right.
But at the time I didn't know how to get our voices in there without our bodies,
right.
which felt less safe.
Sure.
So anyway, it was sort of just this idea that I kept kicking around, and until about 2 years ago, early on, as I was became poet laureate here in Tucson, the Academy of American Poets put out this call for larger citywide or laureate-wide projects, and I was like, "This is the one. It's time," And so the idea was that I would work in community with trans and non-binary folks who may or may not be poets. Sure. that was not at all limited to that identity, poets, right. But that we're using language, that I'm sharing poetry and writing by other trans and non-binary people, because I think first things first, you have to know that exists.
Yes. Yes.
And that we don't sort of talk about it in the abstract, but we're really looking and saying, how is this person using language?
Right.
And maybe that's related to gender, and maybe it's not. So we get to have those conversations, and then that moves into a space of doing one's own writing and expression. And then if folks are interested, it's always, each sort of step is optional, but then they could record their poems, audio record their poems, and then install those poems in bathrooms across the city. And so, wouldn't you know it, COVID happened literally when this was supposed to start.
That recent. Wow.
Yeah, this was supposed to, I finished up the workshops. I was originally only going to do 10 workshops, across the city. I ended up doing 30 because folks were they just kept coming. So I was like, well, this is really fun. And so we, kept having the workshops, and finished those in January. And then I was set to sort of pivot, and turn to the installation part.
Yes. So
I honestly don't know how or if that's going to be able to develop at this point. Right. I mean, there's no public restroom access for anybody right now. So,
right.
But it still feels important. That said, one thing I really encountered that I was surprised by, most of the folks in the workshops were really, really excited to do the writing and to do their personal exploration. But the turn to then recording their voice and sharing it, I found a lot of folks were like, I would love to hear that from other people, but I'm not really interested in doing that. And that wasn't something that I really accounted for.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I feel very committed to following what the people want, like
Of course.
not saying, well, this is my art project and we're going to have to do this, you know?
Right. Of course. Right.
So, so I feel excited about it because it still feels quite open,
Yes.
like how will it develop? I'm going to actually pick up and start doing some more workshops on Zoom since we're
Great.
all kind of
Yes.
hanging out.
Great.
And that will make it even more accessible to some folks who couldn't get to the workshops. So,
Right.
so we'll
That's a good
see.
idea. Yeah. No, I support that. I mean, it's especially something that can have this type of impact. I mean, because the way it works, as we know, is although we may tailor towards a particular group, it winds up being useful for so many others just on the periphery. People who wind up seeing the posts in the bathrooms or this information really goes a long way. And you mentioned even on your website, if you identify as such, we want you to incorporate this way. If you identify as such, this way. If you're cis and straight, step your allyship up in advocacy, help us out. And so that's huge for sure. And I want to explore a little bit the asterisk. I've seen it and I use it. And I'm a proponent of, if this is something the marginalized groups are calling for, then you're not owed an explanation. Let's fall in line and make it happen. You went in on your website and started talking about sort of what the asterisk could mean. So just because you have it on your website, can you talk a little bit about the asterisk?
Yeah, the asterisk, I personally, I feel many ways about it.
Okay.
I don't, and when I'm sort of doing my personal writing or, in other ways, I wouldn't necessarily put it there, not because I don't feel expansive about it, but for me, it does sometimes ring as maybe too academic or sort of too heavy on the linguistic nuance.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
If you're just kind of like, yeah, I get it, then you get it.
Yeah.
And so I struggle with that, and I don't want. Well, I should say, as I was developing that project and developing the website, I really want to make the website feel and be inviting to folks who are not academics, right, and who are not writers. And yet I speak as an academic.
Right.
And so I know that, and I have to really hold myself accountable, for how I'm being accessible or inaccessible. And so that the asterisk in that case is absolutely an attempt to be inclusive. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wanted to really break it down and say, like, these are all the words.
Yes.
And also I think it is a really good practice for me, and I think for anyone in a position of power, to make themselves vulnerable and to say, like, this is what I mean when I say that.
That's right.
And to not hide behind some more generic term, so that if someone calls you out on it, you can then, oh, well, I meant that.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
No, say what you mean right away, so that you can be held accountable for that.
Yes, agreed. I agree 100%. And at Visceral Change, really one of our philosophies is that vulnerability and transparency, even the ability to make mistakes, is at the root of your learning. Because comfortability for me is the root of stagnation, and we just gravitate towards like-minded folks. So we need to be willing to be vulnerable, especially when it allows us to hold our own selves accountable, and so we can grow, even if we're perceived as the experts. I agree with that. You are Tucson's poet laureate. That is what you are. No question about it. No one's taking that from you. That's a heck of an accomplishment. What is a laureate?
Yeah,
And how did you come to achieve such an honor?
it's a great question. Yeah. Well, the Tucson, so poet laureates can function in so many ways, really.
Sure.
And in Tucson, I'm the second poet laureate, and the first, Rebecca Seiferle, she was the poet laureate for like 8 years.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and she did this, she did really awesome work in schools, and sort of bringing out poetry that was happening in not junior high anymore, middle school and high schools. And so when she actually moved, and that was what opened up the position. And so when I was, given this honor, which it truly feels that way to me. I mean, I was like,
Certainly.
okay, this is so exciting, and I'm very scared. And but I felt very clear. I want to do what I can to even push it out of the schools a little bit.
Sure.
like sort of move beyond the traditional classroom, and so the trans space is certainly a part of that. But also doing things like fundraisers and really just bringing folks from the academy and the community and just putting folks together in the same space, and saying, let's hear each other,
Right.
So that's my greatest hope for what I've done, is just bringing folks together.
That's amazing.
But, in some places it's a little more, what would it be, like almost bureaucratic, like you might attend things and speak on behalf of.
Pinky up.
Yeah. Luckily, that's not Tucson's gig. Like,
okay.
We're much more. We even did this one thing, which it just made me so happy. We did Habitat for Humanity builds with poets.
Oh wow!
It was so fun, and so we would gather, do a habitat build, but started off by reading a poem. So it's not huge, not a huge poetry event, but
sure.
I think so much of poetry is living the poem.
Yes.
Moving from reading the poem to having the poem enacted,
yes.
Where the process of being a poet lived.
Yes.
And so that felt like that.
Yes.
It was really
Thank you for that. And that sounds like, I mean, it is a heck of an accomplishment, So when you said it feels like an honor, I have to imagine, it is. Yeah. And, I try to figure it out. And one thing said, it's sort of like being knighted for life. And another one's like, the Supreme Court justice type stuff. So I'm like, let me just ask TC what this is.
Luckily, it's not for life.
Yeah, okay.
It would be, ultimately, I'm like, I don't even think, I think it's good to have new voices, right? Like, Tucson has heard my voice a lot. And I've had a chance to implement some really fun ideas. And ultimately, I can still do that. It just wouldn't be as this sort of title. But I feel my term is coming up, will be at the end of November.
Okay.
And so there will be a new poet laureate coming in. And I am truly so excited, mostly because I'm like, what are they going to do?
Right.
I'm like, what, especially now that COVID has sort of rearranged so much.
Yes.
Someone else's ideas. I'm just really excited I love being a student. So I'm ready to be that person.
Well, just a side question, do your efforts with trans space and other things you were doing under this titles still exist?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. At this point, I feel one of the things that developed out of that on trans space, you might have seen this, was part of this trans poetry resources, which was not at all a part of my plan.
Okay. Yeah.
That was truly just, well, I'm making this list so that there are people I can contact and use their work and things like that. And then I realized, why am I hoarding this little list of all these trans poets? Like, I should make this public.
Yes.
Link to everyone's websites and, kind of do all of that. of course, I had no idea there would be as many poets as
Right,
there
right.
are, which is amazing. But that's ongoing. I update that quarterly. You know, so as a new trans book of poetry comes out, it goes up on the website.
That's great.
And that will absolutely continue on. And then these workshops, I'm like, I could kind of do that as long as people want to do it.
That's right. Yeah. And people need it, and people will be around for that for sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. I want to change the tone a little bit here. And I want to read you some numbers. Right? So according to the Human Rights Campaign, in 2019 alone, at least 26 transgender or gender nonconforming people were fatally shot, killed in violent crimes. 91% of these folks were Black. So this is according to the Human Rights Campaign. TC, just how pervasive is violence against the trans community? And what does this say about violence against Black and trans people of color specifically?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we can ever talk about transness without talking about the ways that violence is absolutely enacted upon.
That's right.
Trans people, and as you point out, particularly and pervasively trans people of color.
That's right.
Mostly trans women of color.
Sure. Yes.
And so you know, one part of your question was, you know, sort of, did you say how pervasive is violence?
That's right. Against this community, yeah.
Right. And I think it's really important that as a white passing transmasculine person, I say, yes, I have experienced some minor violences, and I would call them, compared to being dead, very minor, right?
Sure.
And still real. It's not that my experience of that is not real, but I worry sometimes that when white trans folks start talking, and I know I've been guilty of this, this is not, again, holding myself accountable,
Sure.
sort of taking up the mantle of like transness is inherently sort of like dangerous because because there's so much transphobia, and that is true. And it is also true that whiteness is a protection across gender, across sexual orientation. You know, it is white supremacy. You see it, right? Like it absolutely affects who is being perpetrated against.
That's right.
That's
right.
So yeah, it is pervasive, and it is also pointed. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, it's, you know, almost, I'd probably even argue every year you can expect a statistic of this nature, right? And I'm not going to ask you for a solution, because I get those questions all the time, and we really don't have one. At the end of the day, we can offer ways to mitigate, and maybe resolve some of these efforts in areas, but there's no solution that is within range sometimes.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, there is the very simple solution of like, people have to stop killing trans.
Right, and that's where I was going to head. Yeah, that's where I was going to go. Right. That's where I was going to go. Right.
But it's like, you know, there's also the sort of the intersection too of misogyny.
Yes.
Right. That it's trans women of color.
Yep.
who are being targeted, and how much I feel like we live in a world where to be a woman and to be feminine and then to be a woman of color is to be doubly expendable, or doubly threatening, therefore expendable.
That's right.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's like how to address violence against trans women is to love love Black women.
Right.
You
Really?
know?
Yeah,
Like that's how.
yeah. And,
While they're alive. Like,
yes,
right.
nothing posthumous. So, yeah, let's do
Yeah.
it. And but there needs to be, and I'm sure you have these conversations often. I know I do. And my answer always comes back to the same place: the system. There needs to be a systemic change, and then we can ask about how. And now that's something we can entertain that discussion. But at the end of the day, all the trainings, the workshops, the discussions, the roundtables, even the projects we engage in are seen as just temporary. They're reactive a lot of times. They're in the moment. What we need is something that attacks the heart of the infrastructure, that changes what we perceive to be accepted, acceptable, normal. And to your well said point of, if one answer is to resolve this is to love women, love Black women, just like you articulately said, it can't happen after the fact. Have to happen now. And I would argue that would be the same across the board for all marginalized identities who are trying to find some sort of reprieve in this journey. Yeah.
And I think, we live also in a culture that refuses to grieve. Like,
Yes.
So it's like, I do think the grief is crucial.
That's huge. Huge.
It's a problem when it's the only thing we're allowed to feel.
That's right.
For Black women, for Black trans women.
That's right.
That's not enough emotional range.
That's right. Yeah. And when it's the only thing that ostensibly seems to lead to change.
Mm-hmm.
We gotta get ahead of this. Yeah. So I just got a couple more questions for you, TC, and I'm loving this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. Listen, I'm huge, and I've been saying this a lot lately. So if you've seen the other episodes, folks, I apologize if I keep saying this, but it's relevant. I'm huge on names and name brands and brand names, being cognizant of the effort that goes into it. I think about visceral change, and I tell people all the time that was not overnight. I sat with that, and I'm like, I want this to mean something, and I want it to hit in a certain way. And it was great. And I dropped my book, A Diamond is a Diamond, and I dropped it because I knew I was going to connect it somewhere. When I started talking about it, I was so excited. And I thought I had, the best title in the world. And then I come across Japhyromania, and I'm like, what on earth? And I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I do my research, and first I see Japhyrophobia, which is sort of a fear of bridges, if you will. Japhyromania, this idea, as you call it, an obsession with bridges. I said, where's TC going with this? And then I'm like, wait a minute. This name, as we really begin to dissect, right? It's so for folks who don't know, sort of this book of poems, I believe, that you wrote back in 2014. And I want you to explain so much more. I'm really giving the short sight, so I'd love for you to go in. But the title is so powerful because, as I gather, one of the aims you hope to accomplish in this book is to explain, and I quote, or to explore the spaces between, among, across, and even within bodies. So you say so many brilliant things. I don't want to continue because I don't want to do injustice to it, but connect us to the title, Japhyromania, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Talk to us about this book and what you're trying to accomplish with it, the message and everything.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I had never heard anyone say Japhyromania before. But I don't know. That's just how I say it. I have no idea if that's right.
I typed it in, and the audio pronouncer was like Japhyromania. So I was like, okay, soft G, but Japhyro, let's do it.
I don't know.
Okay.
I found it in a dictionary, truly, so it was, it felt a little bit like divine intervention on that one. So I can't give no credit for that.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, the book was it was definitely bridging a lot of time and a lot of change in my life, and certainly my early gender transition and various forms of loss. And so that's, those are the themes of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, I really wanted the book itself to function as an object
Sure.
that forces you to sort of move between spaces. And so the book does, sometimes it reads this way and sometimes it reads that way. And there's one piece that is it's really a bit of a crossword puzzle piece,
Sure. Yeah.
sort of playing around with things. So I wanted the reader to have an experience of being stretched, into a
Yes.
new place. But I didn't want the reader to be stretched so far that they, were sort of just out in space.
Right.
And some books do that beautifully, but I didn't feel like I could do that well. And so I wanted that discomfort, but then some clarity.
Yeah.
More discomfort and some clarity. And it's funny, I look back at that book now and I don't know who wrote it,
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't have any idea. I mean, I'm so thankful for it and I love it. And it feels, it does feel like a different person. We're related.
Right.
But I've been through many other, I guess, landscapes. I've been across other terrains.
Would you say that's an interesting perspective? I appreciate that. So then, would you say that does the message still hold true for you? Do the concept still hit the same way, even given your 6+ years of experience since then?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I feel like I still. I feel like I still stand behind it as a book. And there are definitely moments when I'm like, ooh, I would do that better now, or I would do that differently.
Yes.
But it's kind of I guess it's the risk the writer wants to take, right? Is to be wrong in print.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
And to have to reckon with that. I mean,
Right.
it would be such a different thing if it only lived online, because then I would put on a better face.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Hey, let's clean that up. So I do like that. If you were to say, look at that book and then look at a poem that maybe came out this year, there would be a tremendous. There's certainly similarities, but they're doing different things.
That's right.
And I do like that. I like that there's a kind of record of that.
And that is, that's powerful. And the ownership, I don't know what you would be referring to, but the ownership you're taking in terms of being vulnerable and saying, this experience isn't the experience now. Maybe this person isn't this person now. And if you were to compare and contrast, I think you would see that. And that is exactly what we mean by when we say this is a journey and not a destination. We are all on this, and we need to pay attention to the change, which, and this offline, you and I can have this conversation at a different time in the future, but we start talking about this idea of cancel culture. And that's an element of what we need to begin exploring is folks have changed. How much grace do we give? I mean, how much is that weight in this discussion? When we start thinking about decisions or choices we made in the past that are not necessarily, or if at all, reflective of who we are today, how much does that weigh, in the larger landscape? So
it's huge. I mean, those questions of how to hold someone accountable, which doesn't preclude some very sometimes consequences,
certainly.
And also how to do that with compassion, and also who should be expected to hold that compassion.
That's right.
I mean, because we can't, I don't think it's fair to expect everyone to be compassionate to everyone else, that doesn't make any sense.
I just don't like you.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, I can hold compassion, so that I can do the work in a way that someone else could not with whatever person we're talking about.
That's right.
And then there will be times when I'm like, you know what, I'm too triggered. I'm out,
That's
like,
right.
I
Yes.
can be a part of this.
Which is, and in my work and yours as well, which is equally as important as the advocacy piece. So I implore folks to become allies and advocates just as much as I implore folks to be conscious of their own capacity and limitations, and don't put yourself in a position where you're going to continue to carry this burden or that is going to do more harm for you. I remember being a First Amendment monitor, and I was allowing folks space to do their free speech, and this one guy, white gentleman, had this massive Confederate flag and had a Trump sign, and that was in my beat. I was like, I can't do it. Sorry, someone else tag in. I can't be here with this guy who's holding this down. And it was something I had to be confident in saying. And like, I'll step over here, but this, I don't have the capacity to do this guy here who's doing this piece. So, yeah, critical.
Crucial. Yeah, I mean, that
critical.
Yeah, that's in that space and that support to say, I have to hold this boundary.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. If you want me to continue with you all, yeah, for sure.
Exactly. And that really underscores the point that this is so much of a sort of community, a dispersed effort.
Yes.
I mean, there's not one person who can fix it.
That's right. Yeah. TC, I got one more question for you, and then I promise you can go take a nap or whatever you gotta do next, because that's what I'm feeling like as well at times. I like to ask my guests this who have clearly dedicated themselves to a craft, and this is really everybody I talk to, right? So this isn't a jab or anything like that, but when you receive titles like Poet Laureate, this question has to come up. In your rise to prominence, really, you received the Arizona Commission on the Arts Individual Artist Award. You were editor of Poem for a Day. You were named, as you mentioned, Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellow, on top of being Tucson's Poet Laureate, a published author, and the list goes on and on. I mean, there's no doubt, TC, that you've worked super hard for these accolades and these achievements. Right? Not necessarily, not to be confused with saying that you wanted them. This was your driving force, but you've worked hard, and your hard work paid off in this way. So I have to ask you, how much of these accolades and accomplishments were for you? And then how much of it was for the trans community and the G&B community beside you or behind you coming up next?
That is such a beautiful question. I don't identify as Pentecostal anymore, or I'm not religious.
Okay.
But that there is something very deeply important to me about that upbringing, which is this concept of service, and tithing, and I, for whatever reason, have always taken that so seriously.
Sure.
Like that this is, we do not play about this. Like you give back, like and it's right. Always sort of like as service. And so, Troubling the Line, the anthology, if I never did anything else, that to me was the thing that I felt like, just to get this conversation started in this particular way, to be able to go to a queer youth center now and literally bring a book and be like, all these folks are trans and non-binary and they all write poems. Like, so do what you want with them, right. Or just look at it and know that those people exist.
That's right.
That project, and so much of my project, is absolutely about sort of looking around or looking forward at the people who are going to come along, and just say, like, you're not alone, like, and on some level there's someone out there who totally believes in you.
That's
you know?
right.
Like, it's, you know, I get emails all the time, and it's one of my favorite things because I'll get emails from younger folks who are like, oh, this is cool, whatever, you know, I saw this, and I'll say, give me your address. Like, I want to send you something.
Wow.
And it's like,
great.
I'm so excited because it's like, I just want us to have that moment to say, like, you totally, I'm so glad you're here. You know,
That's powerful. So that's great.
You're here, you know,
that's great.
And it fills me, right? It fills the child self who wanted to hear that, the teenager,
that's right.
you know, it's like there's all sorts of reparative work that can be done.
Yes.
That's part of it. So there's the awards and things like that. What they give me is really a bigger chance to give more back. Yes. You know, and that's right. That's like the best gift in the world, right? Yes. I mean, like, yeah. I mean, you know, I had this experience, and this is financial, and I think it's really important to talk about finances. Like, you know, I think real moving money from one sort of power position to another is very important. And, you know, after I won that fellowship, you know, I would see things on GoFundMe that was like, you know, trans woman needs rent money, trans woman needs, you know, and I'm right. Like, send. Wow. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it was like, this is what this is for.
That's right.
I'll write more poems whether or not this money is here. What matters is that I can then take this and
that's right.
Move it out. And that's living the poem as far as I'm concerned.
That's it. And, you know, it, when I have these, what we're talking about now is privilege and a little bit of social power in terms of our platform to use that privilege. And, you know, whenever I'm in these discussions, I revert right back to the old Spider-Man or Superman quote, depending on which one you're looking at. With great power comes great responsibility, right? And that's what you're saying is, you know, these awards only gave me platform, elevated my platform to engage in this proclivity, right? To be this generous, which I already was. I just now get to do it in a level that makes other people see it.
Yeah. It's like, I feel like I'm constantly writing the Academy because I'm like, thank you so much, because now I can write this check.
Yes, right.
Because now I can do this, you know? And it's not, it's like, I mean, shit, it's like, sorry. Okay. But it's like, you know, I really, you know, I grew up, you know, a broke kid in the South. So it's like, I'm not trying to have a mansion. Like, I just need sort of like to have a vehicle, have, you know, place to land, like feed my dogs and stuff. So, and a bunch of books. Like, so after that, it's like, let's do this.
That's right.
Let's do this. So I feel so lucky.
Really. TC, that's great. That is great. Thank you so much for being here. And the expletive just lets me know you're comfortable, and that's all that I asked for. So that's all. Thank you so much, TC. Before I let you go, we talked about a couple, but how can the people get in touch with you? Do you have any social media presence, any podcasts, publications, any hashtags, anything?
I do have some social media things, but I honestly don't know what the ats are.
Okay.
And I'm not good at making them consistent, so I'm kind of bad on that front. But you could just go to my website, which is just my name, tctolbert.com, and it sort of links out to all the other things.
Perfect. Nice and easy. One-stop shop, right? Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, TC, for joining us on the Chopping Block. Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, my family, everybody, TC Tolbert, Sherrod Robbins, you're on the Chopping Block at visceralchange.org.